Day one of the Supreme Court's hearing on the suspension of Parliament and whether or not it was legal, lawful, or whether Boris Johnson had given incorrect advice to the Queen started yesterday. Now, I did indicate I was watching it all day. It was an interesting proceeding. What I found truly fascinating about it was the monstrous binders filled with tabs and sources. This is the kind of stuff I actually quite enjoy. The funnier part was Gina Miller's lawyers made a mistake. The mistake was that the legal documentation they had provided to the lords, ladies, judges of the Supreme Court were not the same as the ones they themselves had. Clearly somebody had reorganized the files so that tabs were no longer where they once were, or the numbers were different to that of what the judges, and obviously themselves being lords and ladies, had access to. This caused a number of issues with delays. The delays, of course, being their own doing, but the legal representation in question didn't really mind. Nor was he flustered, which I have to give him credit for. The QC representing Gina Miller and, of course, those who essentially opposed Brexit was Lord Panic. He believes, and presented the argument, over a number of hours and, of course, with much reorganisation, that the government had abused their powers, most notably the Prime Minister had abused his powers as a means to silence MPs in the lead-up to the deadline date of October 31st, being the day we are supposed to leave the European Union. The government's lawyer, Lord Keane, has said that the Prime Minister is entitled to act as he did, and therefore this was not an issue for the courts. Boris Johnson himself has maintained that it was right and proper to pave way for a Queen's speech on the 14th of October to then outline the government's legislative plans for the year ahead. The Prime Minister obviously also insisting that the move had nothing to do with leaving the European Union, or his do-or-die approach to taking the UK out of the EU on the 31st of October with or without a deal. Understandably, the majority of MPs pressed X to doubt. The Supreme Court has to handle this week 2 appeals, one relating to the decision after 2 lower courts ruled in contradictory ways. Scotland's highest court ruled that the 5-week suspension was unlawful, with Edinburgh's Court of Session saying that the shutdown was designed to stymie MPs in the run-up to the deadline, and that Boris Johnson had effectively misled the Queen in the sovereign's exercise of prerogative powers. But the contradiction comes from the court in England, a high court, that ruled the opposite way following a challenge to prorogation brought by Gina Miller. The judge there saying that the suspension was purely political and therefore not a matter for the judiciary. One of the most notable things I saw on the Guardian News live stream of this were the protesters. You had those on the left side who were all in favour of not silencing Parliament. Interesting, really, because the people on the other side, on the right side of the doors to the Supreme Court, were shouting, "We voted out. Why are we still here?" The left apparently completely blind to it. I also find it quite fascinating that the prorogation was obviously brought ahead by Boris Johnson, many arguing it was done because of the deadline. I find it fascinating that you MPs now moan about wasting time when you were all so happy to go on holiday. Remember, when the EU gave us more time, 6 months no less, the very first thing you guys did to not waste time in Parliament was to immediately vote to go on holiday. Like a single one of you has a leg to stand on. If you truly wanted to stop no deal, if you truly wanted to prevent no deal, if you truly wanted to prevent Brexit, you would not have gone on holiday, would you? Or did you need that time to strategise? The Advocate General for Scotland, Lord Keane, told the Supreme Court that in declaring the prorogation null and no effect, the Scottish court had decided to go where no court could go, indicating that if the ruling was upheld, the Prime Minister would take all necessary steps to comply. However, Lord Keane would not comment on whether Johnson might subsequently try to prorogue Parliament again, because he could do that, which would be hilarious. Think, he prorogues it for 5 weeks, you bring him back after 2 weeks, so he just prorogues it for another 5 weeks. Let's think about that. Another 5 weeks on top of this takes us very close to the 31st of October, doesn't it? That could end well. He did say that if MPs did not want Parliament to be suspended, they had adequate mechanisms and opportunities to stop it in its tracks by passing new laws, pointing to the fact that a bill to block a no-deal Brexit was passed in just 2 days. Yes, unsurprising that the cowards finally rear their ugly heads to vote on something that utterly ruins any negotiating positions. Lord Panic has said that the facts show that the Prime Minister has advised the Queen to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks, because he wishes to avoid what he sees as the risk that Parliament during that period would take action to frustrate or damage the policies of his government. It should be pointed, there's only one policy they're really trying to damage, although I'm sure if push came to shove, everyone would vote against anything that actually benefited everyone because Boris be bad man. The pettiness of those in the chamber of the House of Commons is truly astonishing. Whether or not you think that Boris has done this to frustrate them, I'll let you guys decide. Let me know down below. I do also wonder whether or not the Supreme Court judges who posited the idea that he might prorogue Parliament again will use that as some kind of leverage because of their own position. They've already put an idea out there and now the idea has time to fester, which means that Gina Miller's lawyers now have something to work with. It has me concerned, I'll be honest.